Is the sound okay for everyone? Okay, that's
yes,
good.
for me it's okay.
Yeah, for me it's fine.
Usually the safest way is to keep the mic off while we're not speaking, so that yeah, people are beginning to switch on whatever platform they're using. Okay, this is excellent. So I do my intro, and then I hand over the floor, and then we have the EU Commission, and hopefully we will have debates. We will be, if not, I can ask a few questions to set the ball rolling. And my Secretary of State will appreciate that I actually have a green tie today. So it's, we have to think of everything. Okay. Can we start, do you think? Okay. I think I'm going to start. It's 3 o'clock on the dot, and we already have a significant number of people tuned in. Okay. Well, good afternoon. Thank you for being with us. This is a very special occasion. I have the privilege of addressing Mr. Francisco André, Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs and Cooperation of Portugal, Staatsminister Niels Annen, Minister of State at the Federal Office for Foreign Affairs, Herr Thomas Östros, European Investment Bank Vice President, Frau Dr. Christine Hakenesch, Head of the Research Program and Africa Group Coordinator of the German Development Institute, Herr Wolfgang Niedermark, Member of the Executive Board of the BDI, Federation of German Industries, and Herr Johannes Schmitz, Global Head of Finance Advisory of Siemens Financial Services. Dear colleagues, dear friends, Damen und Herren, thank you very much for participating in this Berlin Green Talk. I'm very pleased and honored to host, even if only virtually, what I believe to be a very relevant and timely discussion on the green transition and EU-Africa relations. This is one of the 27 green talks that have been organized in several European and African capitals during the month that leads to the high-level EU-Africa Forum, jointly organized by the Portuguese EU Presidency and the European Investment Bank. It will take place in Lisbon next week on the 23rd of April. It will be one of the most important moments of our presidency, and I thank you all for participating. Also, a very special word of thanks for the excellent collaboration to the Berlin office of the European Investment Bank in organizing this session. Today's discussion encompasses two of the main priorities that we have set out for our presidency: tackling climate change, and, because geography is in this case a welcome destiny, strengthening the relationship between the EU and Africa. We are very fortunate to have been able to gather an encompassing and knowledgeable panel to address the connections between those two goals. They both represent a huge task, and the composition of the panel reflects our belief that governments, alongside the private sector, academia, and the civil society, must play a key role in this regard. And so I welcome as warmly as possible our panelists. They will be speaking about their experiences and the shared challenges of striving for a more sustainable and inclusive development. The Portuguese and the German governments, trio members, are represented, as well as European institutions, the private sector, and leading experts on Africa. Firstly, I would like to greet Portuguese Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs and Cooperation, Mr. Francisco André, an old friend, without whom we would not be here today. He is one of the main promoters of the Green Talks and the high-level meeting that will take place next week. He has wide experience in government and international politics. We actually did the same job as chiefs of staff to the Prime Minister, although with different incumbents. But I dare say that the job is always pretty much the same and very difficult also. We also have with us the European Investment Bank, as I told you, and we are very pleased to welcome Mr. Thomas Östros. He is the Vice President of the EIB. He has been so since January last year, and his areas of oversight include primarily, among other issues, financing of energy and development. Prior to the EIB, Mr. Östros worked for the International Monetary Fund, and he held very important positions as a member of government in Sweden, a country in which I was a happy ambassador many years ago. Welcome. I welcome Frau Dr. Christine Hakenesch, Head of Research Program on Inter and Transnational Cooperation and Africa Group Coordinator of the German Development Institute. PhD, a member of the Advisory Council on Development Policy for the Senate of Berlin. Ms. Hakenesch is a researcher with extensive published work on many African-related issues, namely the relationship with the EU. From the BDI, I extend greetings to Mr. Wolfgang Niedermark. Thank you for being with us, a member of the executive board since October last year. A wide business experience, which includes much time spent in Asia, China, Korea, Hong Kong, as well as Berlin and Brussels. And as we were commenting a little while ago, together with Mr. Östros and myself, we belong to the great 1965 vintage year. Last but not least, I salute Mr. Johannes Schmidt, Global Head of Finance Advisory of Siemens Financial Service. Since 2016, Herr Schmidt has worked for Siemens, a household name in Portugal, for a very long time, and he is much more than familiar with the issues at hand. His is the sort of practical knowledge that underpins the efforts that we are undertaking at this moment. I am certain that we will have a very interesting and thought-provoking discussion. And without further ado, I give the floor to Secretary of State, Francisco André. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, and good afternoon to all of you, ladies and gentlemen, and dear friends. First of all, let me say that I'm very grateful for participating in this Green Talk organized from Berlin. Allow me, first of all, to greet and thank Minister Niels Annen. Minister Niels is a very old friend that, in fact, one of the persons that started to assist me in the reflection about these issues more than 20 years ago. So I'm really glad to meet Minister Niels Annen again and to welcome here in this initiative. Allow me also to greet, of course, Thomas Östros, the Vice President of the European Investment Bank, our partner in this endeavor, for joining us today in this debate. The European Investment Bank, that is a crucial partner for this initiative. This is a salute that I will also like to extend to all other speakers, Christine Hakenesch, Wolfgang Niedermark, and Johannes Schmidt. And I look forward to hearing your experiences and insights. I also want to express my gratitude to my very dear friend, Ambassador Francisco Ribeiro de Menezes. Without his commitment and without his team, today's session wouldn't be possible at all. Thank you very much, Francisco, for helping us and joining us today in this initiative. I would like to start by framing today's event in the context of the ongoing Portuguese presidency of the Council of the European Union. It is a joint initiative with the European Investment Bank, building up momentum to the high-level EU-Africa Green Investment Forum that will take place in Lisbon next week on the 23rd of April, next Friday. And first of all, allow me to ask you to go online and register for this forum. This initiative was conceived as an innovative, ambitious, and provocative exercise to where converge two central pillars of the Portuguese presidency of the Council. I'm referring to the cross-cutting priority of climate transition, as well as the central importance of Africa on the agenda for a global Europe. As we speak, more than 25 dialogue sessions in less than 1 month were held in different European and African capitals to discuss and share experiences on transition and green investment. The exercise of bringing the two continents together to address common goals of sustainable development has been enriching and inspiring. Tomorrow, we will have the last Green Talks. And I am now in a position to say that these Green Talks gained traction on their own and by far exceeded our initial expectations. Indeed, the outcome doesn't stop at delivering a contribution for a successful high-level EU-Africa Green Investment Forum next week. By sharing knowledge, solutions, and good practices, we have learned much about the reality, challenges, and opportunities of materializing the green transition in Africa as well as in Europe. It has allowed us to look further in the future and to how the EU-Africa partnership may evolve. It is difficult to imagine other occasion that could better fit the spirit of the Portuguese presidency. Africa carries little responsibility for greenhouse gas emissions, while it is paying a high price for the dramatic consequences of climate change. It is an unfair and undeniable reality that must not be repeated as we shift to a new paradigm based on a green transition, a reality that reminds us the need to strive for a balanced, fair, and inclusive post-pandemic recovery. Indeed, the past 15 months have exposed the world's common destiny, and it's foolish to believe that the effects of the pandemic and its recovery can be reined in if some are left behind. Dear friends and ladies and gentlemen, we know today that besides an environmental concern, green investment is mostly an opportunity for economic and social development, particularly in Africa. The underlying transformation of a successful green transition can be easily translated to growth and job creation, as well as more competitiveness. It is a once-in-a-lifetime chance to accelerate a long-sought process of economic diversification. Many countries in Africa are still specialized, namely on exports of raw products such as fossil fuels, a concept that is aligned with the driving forces of green transition and what it entails in terms of energizing local value chains, incorporation of added value, reduced dependency, efficiency gains, attraction of productive investment, job creation, and generation of inclusive growth and income. Coinciding with another priority of the Portuguese presidency of the Council of the European Union, I would add digital transformation as yet another unprecedented opportunity to create and an enabling environment for innovation and accelerate technology transfer. All these elements play a decisive role in promoting inclusive and long-term sustainable economic growth and should guide us in our action going forward. In this process, we must be aware that African countries will probably not benefit from recovery packages as the ones we see emerging in some advanced economies. Supporting a smooth and successful green transition in Africa is therefore an imperative to us all. An imperative that requires ambition, but also innovative and encompassing resource mobilization to pool and leverage the financing and incentives needed for such transformation. At a time when green and sustainable have become buzzwords to investors, we must seize the moment to bring together the contributions of all possible actors, including the private sector, international financial institutions, banks, investment funds, development agencies, and all multilateral actors. It is not difficult to anticipate that a resilient and fair recovery will be key aspects of future cooperation relations between countries and regions of the world. For the European Union, it is expected that our relations with partners will also become increasingly focused on the green transition, digital transformation, as well as sustainable and inclusive growth. It is only natural to assume the next European Union African Union Summit as the perfect moment for the consolidation of a partnership between Europe and Africa around similar axes. The green transition must be on the agenda, and our commitment, both as an individual country and as presidency of the Council of the European Union, is ensuring that this approach is fruitful and mutually beneficial. To give an example, under our presidency, the European Union has just approved the new Neighborhood Development International Cooperation Instrument, the Global Europe, or just NDC, with an allocation of nearly 30 billion euros for sub-Saharan Africa. The NDC sets a spending target of 30% of its total allocation, which is almost 80 billion euros, for climate objectives. In a nutshell, green transition is from the outset an environmental concern. However, as one engages in that process, it becomes much more than that. It becomes mostly about seizing economic and social opportunities. In practice, it becomes a bottom-up process of global transformation and convergence emanating from the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement. A process that will be necessarily long, but very much dependent on the decisions we take now. And I would like to conclude with this thought that has just provided me with the opportunity to reaffirm once again the motto of the Portuguese presidency and say it as it is: time to act for a fair, green and digital recovery. And thank you very much for your attention. Back to you, Francisco.
Thank you very much for that. Herr Staatsminister, our dear partner in the trio of presidencies, vielen Dank. Thank you for being with us again. We look forward to your views on how the EU-Africa partnership can support our common goal of building a greener future. Please go ahead. The floor is yours. Vielen Dank.
Well, thank you so much, Ambassador, and it's great that you brought all of us here together, State Secretary Andre and Francisco. It's really a great pleasure. We were joking a little bit before the session went online that we could change the subject and talk a little bit about German and Portuguese politics and our common history, but I think it's not what people expect us to do today. But it's really great to see you, and thank you very much to everyone here on the panel. Before I start, Ambassador, I just want to say that we just went through the EU presidency in times of the corona pandemic. And we had already an excellent cooperation together in preparing for the presidency. And so I think it's fair to say that we have an idea about the challenge that this is all bringing to those who try to organize and to bring everybody together. So I want to not only congratulate our Portuguese friends, but also to thank you all in Lisbon, but also here, Ambassador, for your leadership in crucial times. Cooperation couldn't be better. And also thank you for the opportunity to speak today about how to deepen EU-Africa cooperation. That is something that is really on our agenda. I remember Germany preparing for the G20 summit in Hamburg, where we also had a clear focus on Africa. And I think, as Francisco said, it's becoming more urgent, and we really need to be prepared. There are, from my point of view, three major points that I would like to make here with your permission. So first, the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement are, of course, among the most prominent elements of a rules-based international order. And partnering up with Africa as our ally in keeping the Paris climate goals and the Agenda 2030 objectives within reach will prove the effectiveness of a multilateralism that respects international law and also shows global commitment. Second point I want to mention is we need to specifically join efforts with Africa, and that's why we wholeheartedly support that Portuguese initiative. We need to join efforts with Africa to advance the green energy transition, not only on African continent, but also on our continent. And not only because it's one of the key steps for halting climate change, but also because the green energy transition can become a key driver for economic growth in Africa. It is well established that countries which heavily depend on exports of fossil energy carriers will need to adapt their business models quickly, although will face dire economic fiscal prospects. So I am convinced that localizing energy production carries great potential for economic development, especially in Africa. But if I may say so, that is also the case for countries like Portugal and Germany. The third point, we cannot, and I believe also we will not leave Africa alone with bearing the brunt of increased climate and security risk. The nexus between climate and security was something that we tried to address also during our time at the Security Council. Climate change already today acts as a risk and threat multiplier, accelerating conflict over food, water, land, and other vital resources, leading to instability. And we know that forced migration and sometimes even violence. In the long run, this can jeopardize ongoing progress on sustainable development and even destabilize the entire region. That was the point that Minister Maas made in the Security Council. And if you allow me to be so frank, we failed in getting our draft resolution adopted, also because of the lack of support from the United States. Maybe there's another opportunity to come. Or back to our issues here, building climate resilience will play a key role in fostering development and maintaining peace and stability, especially in Africa, but also beyond. So, dear friends, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, what is it that we need to do? To begin with, we need to mobilize the various policy and financing instruments available to stop up mitigating and adapting efforts based on recently adopted and very ambitious Council conclusions on climate and energy diplomacy and the recently updated EU adaptation strategy. This is particularly timely in the context of a better and greener post-pandemic recovery on both continents. In addition, we will need to expand our national activities with African states within the framework of energy partnership and climate dialogues, such as the German NDC partnerships. And last, but certainly not least, to maximize the benefits of the green transition in a way that is socially just and sustainable, we should secure sufficient public and private funding for Africa. Francisco also mentioned that, combined with offers for concrete partnership initiatives in the lead up to the next EU-AU summit. So that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes my remarks. Climate change and its ramifications are just beginning to shift traditional foreign policy coordinates. And so that's why we are very happy about that political input coming from Lisbon, from your presidency, and we're looking forward to working with you. And of course, I'm looking forward to the other inputs here and our discussion. I leave it with that. Muito obrigado.
Vielen Dank, Herr Annen. If I may add just one quick comment. Our experience from Lisbon and from Berlin certainly is that this trio has been exemplary so far. The transition between the two presidencies was absolutely seamless. The preparation of the joint program was a challenge, and I think that we are showing that the trio mechanism can become a permanent fixture, a working reality, and a functioning reality of the European Union. Mr. Ursula, it's your turn. We are eager to learn about the extent to which, in your perspective, the wider climate concerns should shape development responses and investment strategies. In other words, how can the European Investment Bank quoting from our foreign minister, Mr. Augusto Santos Silva, support economic growth in the African continent, which is increasingly inseparable from the questions of green transition. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Francisco, Secretaries of State, Excellencies, organizers and participants. It's an honor to be invited to this seminar. I must say that the Portuguese presidency is doing a great job in highlighting these issues. As you know, the European Union has committed to become the world's first climate neutral continent by 2050. At the same time, in the energy sector, the EU is setting very ambitious renewable and energy efficiency targets to be reached by 2030. And member states are now developing credible policies to reach these goals. In this environment, the EIB want to be a central actor, being supportive and helpful for member states to reach these goals. But we want to do it also outside the European Union. As you know, the EIB has adopted a climate bank roadmap that is for us a fundamental transition into becoming the key player in this transition. We have a goal to increase our share of financing of climate action and environmental sustainability to reach 50% of our lending by 2025. Already this year, we are in the transition to see to that all our new lending is aligned. 100% of our new lending is aligned with the Paris Agreement. And we have a goal to support investments in the coming decade for climate action and environmental sustainability will reach 1 trillion euros in this very critical decade that we have ahead of us. The context in Africa is, of course, different. It is the continent that contributes the least to the greenhouse gas emissions, and yet it is the first to be impacted by climate change. Growing population, but also economic progress calls for a rapid increase of electricity supply. And it must be sustainable sources of energy and energy efficiency measures that lies as a basis for that development, if it is going to be fruitful for long-term prosperity. I think this is why cooperation between Africa and Europe is so important. Europe is a global leader in the renewable energy sector, which positions European stakeholders very well into cooperation with Africa, in Africa's endeavor to leapfrog away from fossil fuels consumption towards Paris Agreement targets. In addition, well-targeted investment can assist the green transition and contribute to social development, while strengthening the adaptive capacity of people and regions most at risk from climate change. As the EU bank, we are driven by EU external policy, and we invest in accordance with EU values and principles, while we are also responding to the priorities of our African partners at both national and regional levels. We need to cooperate and help each other because we all have different starting positions, we have different challenges, but the solutions to the challenges very often are the same. We need to use scarce public resources better, and we need to mobilize private investment to be able to reach a good conclusion in this period. Without private investment, we will not succeed. And the EIB has a demonstrated track record in mobilizing private capital. When we look over the period 2016 to 2020, the EIB has committed 36% of its lending in the regions outside the European Union to climate action, and will gradually increase in line with the enhanced climate action commitments that we have in our climate bank roadmap. As one of the many initiatives, the EIB supports an inclusive approach to the low carbon transition in Africa and helps to increase resilience for communities and businesses most affected by climate change. There is no trade-off between investing in pandemic recovery and investing in climate action. I would like to highlight that EIB is rather unique in that we operate both in the developed and less developed countries. This means that we are able to scale up and replicate approaches that already have been tried and tested elsewhere. Our financing and technical expertise brings sustainable and inclusive growth and create jobs. With the EIB, the EU has an instrument that can help us all to make a difference. The EIB is the financial arm of the European Union. We are a natural tool for implementing the European Union external investment policy. EIB has operations in more than 140 countries globally. In Africa alone, we achieved record lending levels of lending in 2020, signing more than 4.5 billion euros, half of which was in the private sector. Over 70% of our investment in sub-Saharan Africa were in least developed countries and fragile states. So our lending represents a significant share of all EU official development assistance, with strong private sector, fragile state, and climate action focus. In light of the recent discussion that is going on also now into the spring, the European Financial Architecture for Development, we are working now hard to be able to answer questions from member states on how we can deliver better and improve and reform. And we look forward to engagement with member states in that. And the relations to Africa is, of course, key in that respect. We want to help to maximize the impact of collective EU development cooperation under Team Europe. Contribution of the EIB group will ensure the ability to always have a dedicated EU partner ready to provide development finance for key EU priorities, including climate and health, and in other areas such as migration, digitalization, and support for EU norms and standards. So to conclude, we are ready to step up cooperation with partners across Africa in line with our climate objectives. We are very much interested in increasing cooperations with different actors, because I think we have challenges that really demands cooperation. We need institutions that can provide grants. We need institutions like the EIB that can provide financial instruments. We need to combine technical assistance with financial instruments to really get bankable projects in Africa that can support the green transition. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much. This is very impressive in terms of philosophy, in terms of objectives, and in terms of numbers, in terms of actual results. I think that everyone was paying very close attention to what you were saying, Mr. Vice President. Thank you very much. Frau Dr. Hakenesh, you have written extensively about the European Union and Africa, the relationship, the sustainable development, different aspects of this dialogue. We are all waiting for you to share your ideas on this topic about how the European New Green Deal can or should be used to reshape EU-African relations. Bitte, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Many thanks, Ambassador, for the kind introduction, and many thanks for the Portuguese presidency and for the EIB for bringing us together to discuss on this very important topic, the role of green transitions in EU-Africa cooperation. I think this type of cooperation or engagement on green transitions really has a great potential to bring Africa-EU relations on a different pathways and move the cooperation towards a more equal partnership. Green transitions provide an opportunity to combine cooperation on environmental sustainability with very ambitious programs on job creation and economic development. We see that Africa and the EU both have made green transitions very important topics in discussions on recovery programs in the context of the corona pandemic. And we see that both sides have a very strong self-interest in promoting green transitions, but also there's a lot of joint interests and common interests, and both sides actually need each other in order to move forward on green transitions. When we look at the European Green Deal and objectives for the energy transition or electromobility, there's a clear need for close cooperation with African partners. And similarly for African countries, in order to implement the Agenda 2063, there is a strong necessity for engaging with the EU. So, I mean, there is a great potential in the cooperation and in making green transitions a relevant topic in Africa-EU cooperation. but it's also not a self-starter for the cooperation. Reactions from African countries and the AU towards the European Green Deal have not only been enthusiastic and sometimes also critical. There is a fear on the African side that the European Green Deal means new conditionalities, for instance, when it comes to carbon border adjustment mechanisms, or when it comes to discussions on energy mix and financing for energy supply. There is a fear that the EU maybe defines new priorities for cooperation, while commitments on old priorities, for instance, with regard to climate finance, have not yet been met. So what can be done to really seize the potential that is there in green transitions for Africa-EU relations and for the cooperation more generally? I would like to highlight maybe 3 points that I would see as particularly relevant in order to make this a successful endeavor. First, I think to make green transitions a successful element in Africa-EU cooperation, I think it's important to acknowledge that the starting point for green transitions and the interests and priorities in green transitions on both continents differ to some extent. So whereas the EU has a historic responsibility and continues to have very high per capita emissions, African countries have contributed little to climate change, but are severely affected by the consequences. Whereas the AU's Agenda 2063 gives a very strong priority for poverty reduction and for climate adaptation. In the Green Deal, the social dimension is there, but it is much more limited. So these different starting points, I would say, imply that the EU needs to listen very carefully to what are the priorities from African partners, what are African interests, and what are agendas that are defined on the African continent and in African countries, what priorities are set by African partners. And I also think that proposals for cooperating on green transitions from the EU vis-à-vis African partners can of course only be credible if the EU shows that itself can deliver on objectives that it has set itself towards to implement green transitions. And we heard already about the ambitious objectives towards 2030 with regard to energy and CO2 emissions. So this would be a first point that is important, acknowledge different starting points. Second point that I think is important for making cooperation successful is that, for making it maybe also more legitimate, is to maybe not use only the Green Deal as a starting point, but anchor proposals for cooperation more broadly in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The Green Deal is, first of all, a European project. It's an agenda that with thematic priorities that are particularly relevant for Europe, of course. This is the main objective. For each of the proposed transitions within the Green Deal with regard to agriculture, transport, energy, circular economy, etc., there's also an international dimension to it. But so far, we have not seen a coherent external strategy for the Green Deal that would bring together these different elements. And I would suggest, instead of developing an explicit and comprehensive strategy for the Green Deal, maybe it's easier or more fruitful to use the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs more explicitly and prominently as the main framework for cooperation with African countries. The 2030 Agenda has been signed by African countries and European countries, so it has more legitimacy. And the Agenda 2063, a comprehensive and continent-wide strategy, also strongly in line with the 2030 Agenda and sometimes even goes beyond the 2030 Agenda. So using the 2030 Agenda instead of the Green Deal, I think would also make the social dimension a strong aspect, or would allow for making the social dimension a strong aspect in cooperation on green transitions. It could allow for making debates about around particularly contested issues, such as, for instance, the role of gas in the energy mix, maybe a bit easier. But most importantly, I think using the 2030 agenda as a prominent reference framework for cooperating on green transitions makes it easier to avoid blind spots in the cooperation. If we take the Green Deal as a starting point, cities might not play a very prominent role in Africa-EU cooperation, whereas we know that sustainable urbanization is really key in green transitions in Africa. Thirdly and lastly, I would say successful cooperation on green transition requires that there is a lot of room for horizontal learning in organizing and implementing green transitions. To give one concrete example, there is now a very important debate on the potential of hydrogen in Germany and in the EU more generally. And hydrogen could play a very important role also in cooperation on green transitions between Africa and the EU. But I think it's very important to overcome traditional patterns where technology is developed within the EU, whereas resources are exported from Africa towards the EU. And instead, I think it's very important to make joint knowledge creation and joint technology development very crucial as part of the cooperation in order to move the cooperation really towards a sustainable and long-term partnership. And maybe just 2 words to conclude. When the European Green Deal was presented in December 2019, there was a lot of enthusiasm what this can also mean in terms of potential for Africa-EU cooperation. This has soon been faced with some skepticism from African partners, but I think there is still really great potential in green transitions for Africa-EU cooperation, even though it's clearly not an easy topic, but a lot will depend on how the dialogue is organized and how the cooperation around green transitions is organized. And in this regard, also this dialogue series plays a very important role in order to learn more about different priorities and interests in the cooperation. Thank you.
Dr. Hakkenisch, thank you very much indeed. This was a terrific presentation, and you have actually stolen already one of the questions I had to ask, because I noticed that you published recently a paper specifically on aid and political conditionality and other international efforts to support democracy in Africa. And I was saving that question, but you have already addressed the issue, and I think in a very clear way. And I think that many notes have been taken. So thank you very much for this. Mr. Niedermark, we turn to the BDI. You have developed a wide-ranging work related to green transitions in Europe and Africa. I was wondering also if we could hear from you about the BDI's experience, which will help us to reflect on how private players can support the common goals that we have been addressing. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Still muted.
Yes,
It happens all the time that we are still muted. So, Secretaries of State, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me. It's great to see that you are interested in our view on Africa, what we are doing, and what our priorities are in the green cooperation or the sustainable cooperation with Africa. We have a clear view on Africa, and a very positive one, and that's based on the performance we have seen, the very good development in Africa over the recent years before the pandemic came. So we saw growing middle class, booming trade, and in some countries exceptional economic growth. And this is of course under threat now with the pandemic. And perhaps I would like to share my concern that this, if we don't manage to help Africa as well with a fair distribution of vaccines, that might be or might cause a bigger break in this very positive development. I think we need a fair system of distribution of vaccination here, but that's just a side remark. Whenever we overcome the pandemic, our outlook on Africa remains positive, especially for all of the reasons you just mentioned here in this seminar so far. I don't want to repeat it everything. We focus in our work in what Thomas has pointed out quite clearly. We will reach our goals in Africa only with a stronger private sector investment, and that's what we are promoting. Nowadays, we have, I must say, only 850 companies German companies in Africa. I don't know, in some other European countries, it will be, of course, better, but it's not enough. And we have to promote private sector investment in Africa. And BDI has published a strategy for that. And we would like to convince more and more companies that it's worthwhile to have a closer look at the continent, especially in times where we are talking about relocation of value chains, of redistributing risk from other parts of the world, and to have a more diversity investment portfolio. And we do that in a vast a range of activities. We are active in all kinds of initiatives. The German African Business Summit is organized by us in cooperation with our friends in SAFRI, the Sub-Saharan Initiative of German Business. We are part of the African Network of Business Europe. By the way, we are really strongly cooperating here, in particular with the Confederation of Portuguese Business. And in doing so, we are highlighting the priorities we are setting next to the overall sustainability goals. And the first is regional integration. When we promote Africa, we don't only talk to our German and European companies, but we are inviting our African partners to and to listen to them. And we should take the priorities of the African countries seriously, which is definitely also regional integration. And the African Union recently launched the Pan-African Free Trade Area, which will cover a market of 1.2 billion people and will be one of the world's largest free trade areas. And Europe should engage with this Pan-African Free Trade Area in a very modern way. We are advocating modern economic partnership agreements, not only with Africa, but all over the world, but in particular with Africa. We can show that modern FTAs and EPAs, including social standards and, of course, environmental climate change standards in particular. And then secondly, we have another priority in our work, which is definitely based on the energy transition, which has been mentioned here as well. And renewable energy, of course, plays a key role in this transition, and that has two sides of this coin. First of all, it's important for Africa itself that wind, hydro, and solar power produce clean energy and represent enormous potential for the production in Africa itself. And what Mrs. Hakenesh just mentioned regarding hydrogen, it provides huge opportunities to export energy to Europe again. And Mrs. Hakenesh is right. Of course, we should overcome the usual patterns and not simply just import hydrogen, no matter what the effects in Africa will be, but we should be very careful that this is done in a partnership, in a fair way, in a level playing field way. And that might be the difference to some competitors we might have in the African continent. And I want to mention the Chinese activities in most of today's conference and seminars, we reach the stage where we start talking about China and their role. And that's definitely also necessary for Africa. And now in competition with some Chinese engagement, it's on Europe to prove that we are right with our sustainability approach, which is perhaps a little bit more sophisticated than the Chinese one. And that's our ambition, to bring sustainability to Africa. Hydrogen is one of the examples where we can be successful on this way. And we are looking forward to discuss these matters with you here today. Thank you for your attention.
Herr Mittermark, again, we've had an intervention that has hit several spots. We haven't yet talked about the elements of regional integration and the different levels of interlocution that we have with Africa, with the African Union, of course, but also with all of this that is gestating in Africa. And certainly Europe will need to take a very close look at its global trade relationship with Africa in the future. And speaking from experience, I hope that Europe can be courageous and a bit visionary in this respect, because so far progress with other easier, might I say, regions in this regard has also been fairly complicated. And also the energy transition, extremely important. We have been engaging as much as we can with Germany in this, especially in the hydrogen and the green hydrogen front, because we believe that we can do a great deal together, not only bilaterally, but also with regard to third countries. And last but not least, obviously, the element, the Chinese factor, which we have always contemplated very seriously. Hence, the insistence with which we have been pursuing the next EU-AU summit, which we want to organize and have held as soon as it's feasible. Thank you very much for your comments. Herr Johannes Schmidt, you're up, it's your turn. Siemens Financial Services have an extensive and certainly relevant experience in investing and supporting the green transition, also in Africa. We are eagerly awaiting your words. Thank you very much.
Yeah, good afternoon, Secretaries of State, Ambassadors, Excellencies. Thank you for having me. And as advertised, I will try to give a bit of a practitioner's view on things, because I cannot and will not compete with the high-level strategy discussion that I've heard. I have all respect for this, but my life is much more kind of coined by real projects and by how one goes about this. And when I look at Siemens' presence in Africa for more than 150 years in many countries, some facts that had been mentioned, but not all, really spring to mind. 2 to 3% of CO2 emissions come from Africa, and that's very low. However, what is being pointed out to me is that the source of cooking and heating electricity or energy is mainly wood. And there is a couple of things that really need change, where electricity and other things come handy and are really necessary. We see strong population growth, and we see a lot of promise on the continent. Siemens, as you well know, is active in electrification for industry infrastructure and healthcare, as well as mobility, so a fairly broad range. And I have had the privilege of working for this company full of engineers. I am none, so I live with people who know how things technically work and try to give them my side of the equation, and that's what I'm trying to do today. And I would dub this my perspective on deals, because statistics for me is a summing up of deals, and one cannot move the big number, is my conclusion. you have to set the framework, and that's what I was referring to earlier when I say I cannot and will not compete with this strategic perspective, but please accept my ideas and interjections on how you have more deals, because this will move your statistic and not the big number as such. So what do we see in terms of market conditions? And I have three maybe a little provocative theses at this point. The thesis number one is there is no lack of money or no lack of funds or no lack of foreign direct investment in general. I've spent all morning talking to various funds, infrastructure funds, who are desperately looking for executable deals. Thomas Estros was saying bankable projects. I think that's kind of probably synonymous. Many people want to help Africa, and there's lots and lots and lots of funds available, but somehow these funds cannot be employed. And I want to give my take on why this number is in general a little low and why this is not taken up. But the first point, when people say there is not enough money, I disagree. I think that the willingness to help and the funds are there. The question is, why don't we get these funds to Africa? And my take is that the conditions on the demand side are not it. That's not the reason why there is a lack of projects being executed, because population is growing, energy demand is there, people want to. So there must be something else. And the something else has been alluded to again by Thomas Estros from the EIB. Somehow the conditions do not seem to be right for investable, bankable projects. And I will go into a little more detail later on what we feel investable investment criteria are and how these can be changed and how these might really be influenced by this big strategic thoughts that you are carrying around here, because really that's, I think that it's doable and some things can be changed. When we talk about projects, for me, it's three criteria. They need to make economic sense. There must be truthfulness and transparency in terms of around the projects, and there need to be local partners involved. Because if we talk about this export question, if I take the last one first, because that's easiest, the local partners are essential, because you will never move cement from Germany to a power station or to a rail system or to a hospital in Africa. The maximum I have seen in Siemens projects content that is export is probably 25 to 35%. All the rest is coming elsewhere, and all the rest is not core technology, but all the rest is necessary for the whole thing to function. So we need to really look at who can the local partners be? How can we find local partners that can cooperate in a situation like that? And actually, simply put, how can they withstand or kind of get through a corruption test, a compliance test? That's very, very important. They must have internal procedures and be ready to work with the framework we are having. Siemens was, as you may recall, 3 years ago, executing mega projects in Egypt, and the 6.5 billion for 3 big power stations in a matter of 2 years. This was record by many counts. The big point that we were envisaging was really, or were encountering, was really that the question of environment, health and safety on the construction site was something unheard of in Egypt. There were accidents on the site, and it took us long to really get the entire site up to speed with the environmental and healthcare and otherwise requirements that the banks and others put on us, and they haven't been done in Egypt before. So we need partners who can on the ground not say, look, this is Egypt or this is any country, don't say Egypt, any country, and we do it our way. We need to see to it that these environmental, healthcare and safety standards are really such that they can be understood. And here we need local partners who can do that on the one hand, but we also need a local government and local regulation who support that. So there will always be a huge local element, and there will almost never be a project which is 100% imported to any country. it will always be 50% or more that is done locally. And we need a solution for that as well. Taking again my 3 points backward, I'm back at the truthfulness and transparency point. We want to compete on price and quality of our product. That's an engineering company, and the better product should win. This is not always the case that there is a fair process and fair terms. The Voldemort question has been raised by Wolfgang Niedermark. There is another nation in Africa very active who are playing by very different rules. And that is something that is in the way of a green deal or regulations as we wish them to be applicable for these projects. Again, I want to stress Siemens is an engineering company. If you set the bar here, we try to jump over it. And our engineers can good as any others, probably better, I hope. And the well-crafted tender is then, how can we get the truthfulness and transparency into the deal? And that's my first and main point to raise to you and to all who can support Africa in putting out good tenders. My personal view is my role changes. When someone asks me about input, or our engineers, anyone, helping for a project, how can you best find a solution for a given problem? All of the engineers are willing to help. We are willing to find financing. We are doing all of that. Once the tender is out, all bets are off. Then I will not talk to anyone anymore until our bid is in. And I think local governments, but also supporting organizations are lacking or are missing out on this first phase. In the first phase, getting as much information into the project and tender documents as possible to find the best deal is more often than not missed, really. If you put a tender out, then my job changes. My job is to punch as many holes as I can into the tender and see how can our offer look better than the competition's. And there I'm not in any way obliged by anything but the benefit of my employer. And if the tender has, let's say there are 3 components being bid, and you say you have ABC, and the 3 components will cost you 100. The engineer will tell me that you need component 4 for the whole thing to work. Now, if the tender is out, I will not tell the customer that he needs a component 4, because the component 4 will then come at a much higher price if the first 3 are won. And this is why I'm saying this first phase in crafting a fair competition is oftentimes missed, and the openness of industry to contribute to define and devise a technically superior solution is often missed. So I think there is more input that can come in, and there is advisors on the technical, contractual, and financial legal side abundant, and you know all of them, but they are only employed too late in the game, in my mind. And this is when the damage is already done. The first, or in my order now, the last, is really the project needs to make economic sense. We don't want to and should not be sending old equipment or second best solutions to these countries. I think that's an obvious nowadays, hasn't always been the case. We must have local content as discussed earlier, and the sustainability question I do not want to elaborate on because that has been talked about quite a bit. So my last question is then, how do you come to a fair, constructive competition? How can you get the best out of the many engineering companies or solution companies there are around the world? First point is focus on outcome. And this is really, again, the tender phase. People should not be tendering equipment or something, but they should open up for solutions, because the total cost of ownership is what counts. And if you have a train or any piece of equipment that requires spare parts, and these spare parts are then costly over the term, then you must have those in the comparison. And as I said, we want to compete on technology and price. And if our solution is a little more expensive, but it needs a lot less spare parts, sometimes the tenders are not reflecting this well enough. So that's again my point and focus, total cost of ownership. And my plea is really for governments and all those involved in this, please reach out to industry know-how and market participants before you craft a tender. And it doesn't really help if you add another 100 billion of potential aid if this then goes the wrong direction, but really spend the time and effort to do before the tender comes out, spend the time to find the right solution. Siemens, I think in many instances can be a partner and wants to be a partner in this effect, and we want to fairly compete. We have done so in many countries, and I really think involving local content, local partners, and getting the tender forward-looking, crafted in a way that is efficient for the country is something where there is room for improvement. This would be my practical view on things. No change or disagreement with any of the strategies posed earlier, but eventually that's where the rubber meets the road, because this is when we see the transaction happening, and that's then my job in the low life of real transactions rather than the stratospheric strategy. But it's good life anyways. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for in a way bringing us back to earth in that sense. But your comments and views were exactly what I was hoping for, because we have heard very sobering and very brave thoughts about hands-on experience and some of the realities that are faced in the fields, as it were. And I think that this is a very important component, and certainly also many notes have been taken. We have received a number of interesting questions. We are a bit short on time, but I would still want to ask my good friend, the representative Vertreter of the European Commission here in Berlin, Jörg Bojan, to give us his take on this, especially because he represents here in Berlin the von der Leyen Commission, which has been very active and has tried to infuse some of this vision into the overall mandate of the Commission, as it were. Dear Jörg, can you hear us?
Yeah, Francisco, thank you very much. I can hear you, I can see you, and I think you can see me. Ministers, Secretaries of State, Excellencies, thank you very much for this opportunity and this very interesting discussion. And indeed, Francisco, as you said, the von der Leyen Commission has since the beginning put a great deal of emphasis on Africa. And as you will remember, my president did her very first trip outside of the EU to Africa, to the African Union. I think that was a powerful symbol. And already in May last year, only a few months into her mandate, she presented together with the High Representative and Vice President Borrell our EU-Africa strategy. And the private sector and also in particular small and medium-sized companies were a particular important part of it. I'm not going to go through this strategy, of course, because all of you have mentioned all the various aspects during your interventions, and here particular thanks to the Vice President of the EIB, with whom we cooperate very closely as a Commission, and as it is the EU's bank. I would just like to concentrate on one aspect which Mr. Schmidt of Siemens has really brought to our attention again. It's good governance, the need for good governance. We have really developed our strategy towards Africa with all new aspects, which we maybe haven't been taken into account so much in the past. But one thing we have learned as in our EU international cooperation, international partnerships, is the importance of good governance. Otherwise, you will not have those good tenders, you will not have that non-corrupt public administration, and you will not have absorption of the money, as Mr. Schmidt says, where there is no lack of. So we should not forget this, and we try to be a guarantor of this, even though it might not look so much in fashion, and even though we have some big competitor out there, as it was already mentioned by Mr. Niedermark, the Chinese factor, which doesn't really care so much about the good governance aspect. And so this is a particular challenge for us because we cannot so easily insist on it anymore with somebody and another donor or investor or whatever you might call usurper from China not really caring about this. So there is a big temptation out there for the African partners, all the more important for us to keep this aspect high on the agenda. And I just wanted to flag this from our perspective as European Commission with all the experience we have on the ground with the relevant projects, technical cooperation, and so on and so forth. And the second point I wanted to underline, also touched upon by Mr. Niedermar, the importance of the Africans themselves and them setting up a great market and the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is an enormous step forward, and it will help us in many regards, help us and help the Africans themselves in the very first place, because already for setting this up, you need a certain level and establish a certain level of good governance, efficiency, effectiveness in governance. And this will be beneficiary for everybody. So it is in our big interest to support them in this as well. So these were my little remarks, and thank you so much for letting me in.
Thank you. You're very useful and concise and to the point as usual. We do have time constraints, but we still have time, I think, to field a couple of questions. One of them, well, anyone is welcome to step in terms of answers, but from my side, I was wondering if my Secretary of State could give us a little bit of the feedback that we have been receiving, especially from our African partners in these green talks in the run-up to the high-level conference. We as a country have the privilege of having very good relations with the Portuguese speaking countries all over the world, especially in Africa, for this purpose. And this is actually, I think, a defining asset of our foreign policy. And this has allowed us to develop a great deal of mutual trust with our African interlocutors. And this is why I think that this feedback is very important. So this question I would address to our Secretary of State. The second question that has caught my attention comes from an African ambassador here in Berlin. He asks us to reach out and engage with African counterparts throughout the process. In his words, not only after we have prepared the meal, but as we are preparing the meal. And I think that this goes in the direction of a bit of what everyone was saying in this panel. It is essential, I read, to organize virtual meetings with both sides. And to this, I would add to the mix, again, the issue of our interlocutors in Africa. We are talking as a union, but we know that we all have, to some extent, separate individual cooperation policies. It is true that we have approved the strategy for diplomatic climate action, which binds us in terms of our common joint action in international fora. But when we look at Africa, it is difficult not to notice that there's obviously different interlocutors, certainly with different interests, and that although the dialogue between the African Union and the European Union is very developed, it's certainly a structure that still lacks the complexity of our own institutional system in the European Union. these are the points I wanted to raise. I was wondering if my Secretary of State would like to step in at this moment.
Yes, Ambassador, and thank you. Just allow me briefly to comment, because both your question and also the question from Ambassador Tom Anolo go in the same direction. First of all, about the feedback of our African partners, just to underline that the feedback is excellent because we are being truly partners. What we have done with this process of green talks and with a high level is working for a strong partnership. And when it comes to partnership, and then also answering Ambassador Ntomanolo, it means that no, we are not delivering the meals. We are preparing everything together. We are discussing everything together, and we are addressing this, all these questions and the reflection about green investment as a joint task that we must all engage in together. So the feedback has been quite positive. I would like to remind you that despite we are all here in the Green Talk organized from Berlin, the majority of these Green Talks until now were held in African capitals, in close dialogue and cooperation with African authorities, and with this mix of African and European experts from both the civil society and from the institutional level. And this is why we feel that this is the proper way to build not only a partnership, but to all this dialogue that we want to be fruitful with objectives, and that we want as a crucial mean to feed the agenda of the next EU-African Union Summit. Then allow me also, Ambassador, lastly, just to mention, I noticed that we have also some comments from Olivia Berton from ODI, which I want to thank her for her involvement, well, to participate and what assist to this Green Talk today, but also for her engagement and ODI's engagement also in organizing one of the Green Talks on this process, and especially to highlight a decisive thing, which is the role of cities in the dialogue between Europe and Africa. And lastly, and before giving the floor to all other colleagues here, just to thank you once again from the ideas, the vision that everybody brought in today, which I think that all of them are very important. To really thank Johannes Schmidt for giving us a very concrete vision on how to approach some of the questions that are raised when we discussed how to go through with this green investment in Africa, and he gave us a real concrete approach on this, and I really want to thank him for that. And for the rest of the speakers, thank you also once again for participating in this, Francisco as our ambassador and good friend. And everybody understands that once again, a special greeting to Minister Niels Annen for being present here with us today, that I really like to see after so many years. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I was wondering if State Minister Niels Annen would like to comment also on these issues. And I would add another element to the mix. We have received also very challenging, it's a reflection and a question. Given the reality of, as we have been calling it this afternoon, the Chinese factor, and given as the question is put that Africa is unlikely to choose sides, should we work together with China, and how can we work together with China in this respect? I think that this is a very provocative question. Herr Annen?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
No, Ambassador, thank you very much. And I think it's a crucial question. And, you know, Germany has never ruled out to cooperate with China. I mean, we have been on the benefiting side of China's economic growth. So it would be kind of strange just because we are seeing global tensions rising now to rule out cooperation with China in Africa. Well, the question is on what base? And that's not an easy question to answer in a few minutes, but I just want to say, if I see that China has already taken control over half of the entire cobalt production in the Democratic Republic of Congo, well, I mean, we could maybe also blame that on our own inability to act quickly enough, but there are certainly not always good business cases behind certain Chinese decisions, but there is another way to take a political decision also when it comes to investment policies. And that is something that we need to address with our Chinese partners and friends, and to use the European language to see China as a partner, but also competitor. And I believe that's also true for the representative of the private sector here on our panel. But as a representative of the Federal Foreign Office, I can also not ignore the third aspect of China being a strategic rival. So all that comes together, and Africa, in a way, because Chinese engagement is maybe the oldest and the longest experience that we have. This is a special and very important aspect. I mentioned that very briefly in my introduction, but I just wanted to pick up on what some of our friends here just said about how crucial it is to involve the private sector. And, you know, we don't want to copy the Chinese way of doing business with China. We cannot and we don't want to. So that's the cooperation with the private sector is the prerequisite for the question whether or not Europe, and if I may use an old-fashioned expression, the West would be successful in that endeavor. And that's why with the Compact for Africa discussions in Hamburg at the G20 and the follow-up, I think we made quite an important statement and initiative. And I see the European Union and our friends now under Portuguese leadership having a real impact. So I'm rather optimistic about, you know, rising the awareness for what is necessary right now. Ambassador, if you allow me, because I have to leave you in a couple of minutes, just to very briefly pick up on what has been said about the need to cooperate with Africa and African countries on other levels as well. And we talked about the pandemic, and I couldn't agree more what has been said about the need for vaccination. I just want to use that opportunity to say that the German government has contributed significantly, as has other European countries, to the COVAX facility and the ACT accelerator. And we are delivering vaccines to African countries. I just saw an update on our contributions for Morocco, for other countries. So that remains essential. And I think we made progress. We have a tendency to look at Africa from, you know, sometimes very narrow perspective, because then we look at regions where African crises made it to European awareness. So I think it's important to work with the regional organizations, and the African Union is a partner, but also other regional organizations, especially in regions where Germany has been extremely active in the Sahel region, the initiatives that we are continuing for the Great Lakes, but also in conflicts like Libya with the Berlin Conference, for example. All of that is and remains important, but it shouldn't, you know, take away the focus on other regions in Africa. where crises and conflicts are not the daily experience, but where we do have economic growth, where we are making progress. That has been put into danger because of the economic impact of the pandemic. So I believe the European recovery and the green recovery needs to go hand in hand with our cooperation with our African countries. And I'm very happy, Ambassador and dear Francisco, two Franciscos, that we have a real partner with the Portuguese presidency. But as I said before, the cooperation with the private sector is crucial. So I'm happy about that cooperation as well. And thank you all very much.
Herr Staatsminister, vielen Dank. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for your time. We know you are very busy. We're also nearing, I think, the end of our own time. Indeed, we are paying a great deal of attention ourselves to COVAX. And as you know, we have been very active in Brussels trying to help to sustain the coordination among European member states and institutions with the production, the rollout, the distribution of the vaccines, but also with European solidarity in terms of the availability of vaccines. It is understandable that as we work with COVAX, we should also bear in mind our traditional interlocutors and our traditional partners in Africa. But I think that the sum of all parts leads to a greater whole also in this, and that in that respect, we are all trying to help, and we are trying actively to help with some concrete results. I was wondering if, in light of the points that have been raised in discussion, any of our members of the panel would like to add comments of their own. Mr. Oswald, please.
Thank you. Just a short couple of comments. First, on the vaccines, I totally agree, and that is in the short run the most important stimulus measure we can have, both for the European economy and for the global economy, and not least for Africa. EIB, in strong cooperation with the Commission, was a very early mover in approving a 400 million euro loan to COVAX, and we are now in discussion of topping that up further. That is, I think, a good example of how our role as an EU bank in strong cooperation with the Commission can really deliver quickly in these type of circumstances. There was many aspects that was interesting. The Pan-African Free Trade Area, I think, is crucial, as Wolfgang mentioned. That will also spur economic growth and productivity, and the demand for electricity will increase. And I think in this environment, we should really try to see what type of investments with our African partners are the most crucial ones. And I would like to point out to investments in the grid as one very important step forward, and not least regional grids that can also be the platform for distributing renewable energy. But we also have many remote and sparsely populated areas where we rather would invest in mini grids and distributed household level systems that could also be very important in spurring local growth. And just a comment to Johannes, I think your intervention was extremely interesting, and it shows how important I think is for us to come more upstream in our preparation with our African partners, sort of cooking the dinner together, as the ambassador referred to, with technical assistance, with expertise upstream in the process to be able to deliver later on bankable projects that we can, for instance, invest in. And I think this is something that we should do together more. Different actors cooperate upstream in the process to be able to do this kind of important investment going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other Yes, thank you. I would just like to add something because it's an important element. In our case, in terms of vaccination, we announced in February that we would set aside 5% of the allotted vaccines to be distributed to the Portuguese-speaking countries in Africa. And that's our way of demonstrating our solidarity. And this is why I mentioned the issue. I think that we are, yes, it's now 4:30. We have been doing this for an hour and a half. I would again like to thank you all. I think that this has certainly been very fruitful in terms of the knowledge that has been shared, the experience that has been shared. We had a significant number of people listening in, and this is very useful. And I'm very glad that from the German side, we have been able to contribute to the high-level conference that will take place next week. And just to stress again that if you have the opportunity to tune in, it will be very, very useful indeed. On a happier note, I think that if we managed to prepare the meals together, reflecting our experience and our taste, we will be able to develop a Euro-African fusion gastronomy that might be the recipe, I think, for the very exciting road that we have ahead. And this road will be easier to pave if we keep doing what we have started doing with these Green Talks. I thank you all, Staatsminister, Secretary of State, all of you. Also, thank you very much for your time. I think that all the topics that needed to be addressed were addressed. This is a very easy discussion to prolong in time. We could do this for the rest of the afternoon, certainly. Alas, we cannot. Vielen Dank to all of you, and bleiben Sie gesund, stay healthy, stay protected, and please tune in next Friday, okay? Goodbye to all. Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.